been to the grocery store, if you've read news headlines, consumer headlines, you've seen the headlines that have been screaming at you, beef prices all-time high, right? It catches your attention, but we really wanted to dig in a little bit more and find out what kind of the real story is here. So joining me now is Kelly Schmidt, the CEO of the Minnesota Beef Council. Thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for reaching out and glad to be with you.
Yeah, so speaking of that, I know you've been getting, tons of calls from reporters, people like me. Everybody wants to talk about beef prices, but what we're dealing with right now is something that you all have been navigating, not just for months, but for years. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I mean, it's so you're right. This hasn't just happened overnight. It hasn't happened in the last month or so. This is something that we've been watching really uptick for quite a while. And those of us that are in agriculture all the time, we've seen this before if you've been around for a while. Things can go in cycles. And we also, because we're in it every day, we're aware of things that happen and how they might affect our industry in the next year or two. And so really one of the big reasons, and it's complex, there's lots of reasons of how we got here, okay. But one big reason that we've seen what's happening now is we have a simple shortage of the supply of beef cattle to make beef. That's the simplest way to put it.
Okay.
Now within that, there's lots of reasons, and it gets a little complicated why, but the major reason is a few years ago there were widespread drought conditions across the country. And when you look at beef as a protein compared to other proteins that are grown out there, it takes land to grow that resource, a lot of land for the animals to graze and to graze efficiently for the farmers and ranchers. And so because a few years ago we saw a lot of widespread drought, there were decisions made by a lot of farmers and ranchers that they could not maintain the size of the herds they had and economically keep them and feed them and do what they had to. So a lot of cattle were sent to market that weren't initially replaced. And because of that, it shrunk the supply. On the other end of the economic spectrum, we kept demand really high. Demand has been very, very good with the American consumer. And so when those two things happen, when supply goes down and demand remains or gets higher, price goes up. And that's the basic reason of how we got here today.
That's so interesting that you're talking so much about the drought piece of this, because as I've been perusing headlines for the last week or so, I keep hearing about this bug or this virus in Mexico that's affecting cattle there, and people want to. I don't know if it's just kind of fun to say the name of this. I don't know why we're gravitating so much to that. So how much of an impact does that actually have on all of this? Because it doesn't sound like that's the main driver.
Well, it's timing, right? It's timing of dealing with this, because a year ago we weren't dealing with that risk. 2 years ago we weren't dealing with that risk as prices were going up. Now that we've gotten to high prices, which I would contend was going to happen anyway, along with that, coinciding with it, we're having the risk of the New World screwworm, which is something that the American agriculture dealt with, I believe, back in the 60s. I'm not an expert on that topic, but that's something that we had dealt with and managed back then. And it's made its way through Central America and it's in Mexico, and it's a risk to the American herd if that screwworm was to make its way into our supply. Cattle have to be removed from the herds if they get that. So we want to keep that away, and we have to this point. But what you're referencing is because of that, we've had to close the borders to protect our American cow herd at the Mexican border. So when you do that, there are a certain amount of cattle that every month, all year long, move over the border and are a part of our beef system. Okay. So when you shut those off and we're already in short supply, it's just going to add a little bit to the shortage we have.
Okay.
And so again, these high prices aren't solely because of that, but that is a contributing factor as of late to an already short supply and an already rising beef price.
Oh. So can you help us understand like the perspective here as far as, because we know the prices we're seeing when we go to the grocery store. I keep seeing all-time high in the headlines, things like that. But give us some perspective historically as these cycles have happened. Like, is this really as sort of a big deal as the headlines would have us believe?
Yeah, no, I would say it is. They are at all-time highs for price per pound. These are some of the highest prices we've seen. This has happened, in the past. Like I said, cycles do happen. Last time we saw a really strong beef price and cattle market like this on a relative basis was back in 2012, 13, and then it really started to change in 2014, back to where the prices moderated. And so we've seen a little bit of that before, and we expected when you see those things happen, when the supplies get short, and again, it was many of the same reasons the last time when that happened was widespread drought across the country, amongst other things, and demand staying strong. When you usually see that, you see farmers and ranchers that want to take advantage of that high price. So what are they going to do? They're going to expand their herds to have more beef cattle available at that high price.
Yeah.
And when many other people do that and participate that in the marketplace, it's called a herd expansion. And when the herd expands, because a lot of people are keeping those females to raise more beef animals, eventually you're going to see the supply stabilize with demand, and then the prices begin to moderate.
Okay.
That will happen. It's going to happen. It's inevitable that it's going to happen. What's interesting now is that it's taken a little longer.
Okay.
Again, for a variety of reasons. The prices have been very, very good. We have an aging workforce in our farmers and ranchers, and in some cases, some are reaching retirement age with no one to come in to run those ranches. And when they decide to liquidate their herds and send them to market, sometimes they're not getting replaced. And so that's another small factor in all of this. The ability to do business, and I think all viewers can understand that. Inflationary factors, the cost of just running a ranch and doing business, the margin is not as good as it once was. You hear these high prices even at the ranch level, but they have a lot of expenses to run these farms and ranches. So some have hung in there, and some have decided, for not making this kind of money, is this what I want to do? So those are all, again, contributing factors to the supply of beef we have.
Oh yeah, I was talking to my coworker Natalie. They're farmers, and she was saying that right now the amount that they're paying for cattle is insanely more than it was just even a couple of years ago. I'm curious, what is the kind of human impact of all of this, of people who are trying to make a living and this is their livelihood? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but what are you hearing from folks?
Yeah, I'll take a brief minute, to explain that, because that's exactly true. There's a part of our business that is having to pay more than they ever have for cattle just to raise them, and that's spot on. But if you think about the supply chain, all businesses, everything has a supply chain. You think of a supply chain like the Mississippi River, right? Yeah. At the one end, where the river starts, we have the person that's raising the cattle, where the cattle are born. And then at the end of the river, we have the consumer. And there's lots of places in between. And that includes who raises the cattle. We have a very segmented parts to our beef business. And what I mean by that is there are certain people that breed the cattle, and the cattle are born at their place, and they're grazed on the grass and the resources they have. And oftentimes they will then sell that calf later, after it's been with its mother and it's weaned for 5 to 6 months, onto the next segment. That next segment may grow that calf for a while and then ultimately finish it out to be an animal that ends up on the plate. So depending on where you operate in that segment, your profitability can vary. Right now, the cow-calf producer that's at the beginning of that segment, they are seeing some really high prices for their calves, as high as they've ever seen. Notice high prices. I'm not necessarily saying it's the most profitable they've ever been, but the cow-calf producer is definitely selling calves as high as they've ever seen, and they're seeing some good times.
Yeah.
But if you're in that next segment, if you own a feedlot and you buy those cattle that you usually put, and let's say you're growing crops, hay, and maybe corn silage and other crops to then feed those cattle after you've bought them and then sell them in the end, that can get a little tougher because you're buying a calf that's as high as it's ever been. And that's the challenge.
Okay.
So it really depends on where that person sits on the segment of the beef business.
Before I let you go, just the $1 million question, I guess, is just, you alluded to it here just a bit ago, but, what are you looking for in the next coming weeks, months? Are we for things to level off? What's your feeling here?
Yeah, it's tough to say exactly when that will be. That is the magic question, right? We know inevitably it will level off. It's going to, it has to. Can I tell you if that's going to be in 3 months, 6 months, or a year? I don't know. And I will say ultimately the consumer will decide. Demand has remained strong. As we've ticked up these prices, beef continues to sell. And from our perspective as a beef council, what we're doing every day is consumer education and promotion, making sure people feel informed, kind of like today, informed about beef and why it's a good protein choice for their, meal plan for the week, whether they're going out to eat or they're buying food for their family. And so we've seen folks, that have said, man, it's getting up there in price. I encourage you, look at other cuts that are more affordable. Adjust some of the ways you shop. There's still great ways to put beef in the cart or select beef without buying the most expensive steak that's at the meat counter. Some people are still doing that. It's the summer, it's grilling. Some people are saying, you know what, I know it's expensive, but it's all about an experience. I had an $8 coffee this morning. I'm gonna have a $25 steak tonight.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, Kelly, we really appreciate your time today and helping to kind of give us some perspective on all of this, on what's really kind of going on. And I'm sure we'll see you out at the state fair. So
yeah, we'll be there. Look for us. We have a booth in the building. If you're curious about beef, look for us in the dairy building. We're glad to talk to you.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Kelly. Appreciate it. Minnesota Beef Council CEO.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.